My name is Kendra, and I'm 33 years old. If you had met me just a few years ago, you would have thought I had everything figured out. I had a steady career as a marketing manager, a close group of girlfriends I could call any time of the night, and a family that checked in often enough to remind me I was loved, but not so often that I felt smothered. On paper, I was doing fine, more than fine, really. But sometimes the biggest cracks don't show up on paper. They show up in the quiet spaces between phone calls, in the unanswered messages, in the places where love is supposed to exist but doesn't. That's where my story begins with silence. Ethan wasn't always silent. In fact, when I first met him, silence was the last word I would have ever used to describe him. He was magnetic. The kind of man who seemed to make every room brighter when he walked in. He was charming, funny, attentive. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world who mattered. When we first started dating, he called me every single morning just to say good luck at work. He texted me in the middle of the day to ask if I'd eaten lunch. At night, we'd talk until one of us fell asleep with the phone still pressed to our ear. That's how it was in the beginning, constant reassurance, constant connection. And for a while, I believed that was what forever would look like. I let myself imagine what it would feel like to wake up next to him every morning, to build a life together. I started weaving him into my future without realizing that he had never truly invited me into his. The first change was so small I almost missed it. He didn't call one morning. Instead, he sent a quick text that said, "Busy day, talk later." That was fine. People get busy, right? But then later didn't come. By the third night without a phone call, I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter. I told myself not to panic. That maybe I was being clingy. That maybe I needed to relax. But deep down, something inside me whispered that this was the start of something I didn't want to face. Days turned into weeks. His messages grew shorter, his calls less frequent, and the silence between us grew louder than anything else. I'd stare at my phone at night, willing it to light up with his name. But it never did. I started leaving voicemails that went unanswered. I wrote texts that he left on read, and each time he ignored me, a part of me cracked, but I still held on to the hope that the man I fell in love with would come back to me. My friends noticed the change before I admitted it out loud. "Kendra," my best friend Vanessa told me one night, "you can't keep waiting on him like this. A man who wants you will show you." Silence is still an answer. But I wasn't ready to accept that yet. I defended Ethan every chance I got. "He's just stressed at work," I'd say. "He's going through something he hasn't told me about." I built excuse after excuse, because believing he didn't love me anymore was unbearable. Still, the silence haunted me. I began to question everything about myself. Was I not enough? Did I say something wrong? Was there another woman? I found myself scrolling through his social media late at night, searching for clues. He posted less and less, and when he did, it was vague, impersonal. The captions that once held inside jokes between us were gone. It felt like he was erasing me quietly, without ever saying the words out loud. That was the hardest part. He didn't even give me the decency of an explanation. No closure, no fight, no goodbye. Just silence. And sometimes silence hurts more than any cruel word ever could. I remember one night in particular. I sat on my bed, phone in hand, dialing his number again even though I knew he wouldn't answer. The rings seemed to echo through the emptiness of my apartment. When it went to voicemail, I didn't even bother leaving a message. I just sat there, staring at the black screen, wondering how love could fade into nothingness without warning. Tears stung my eyes, but I swallowed them back, refusing to let them fall. I told myself I had to be strong, but inside, I was breaking. It felt like my entire world had been reduced to waiting for a call, for a text, for a sign that I still mattered to him. But that sign never came from Ethan. It came from someone else, someone I never expected. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk trying to force myself to focus on work, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. My heart jumped, thinking maybe it was Ethan calling from a different phone. I answered quickly, saying his name before I even heard the voice on the other end. But it wasn't him. It was a man's voice, calm and professional, introducing himself as a lawyer. For a moment, I couldn't even process what he was saying. My mind spun with confusion. Why would a lawyer be calling me about Ethan? What could possibly be so important that it required legal involvement? My chest tightened as questions flooded my head. But the lawyer's tone left no room for panic. He explained that Ethan had filed documents that involved me, and that I needed to come in to discuss them. I felt the blood drain from my face. Documents? Filed against me? The lawyer wouldn't disclose details over the phone, only urging me to set up an appointment as soon as possible. My hands shook as I scribbled down the address. When the call ended, I just sat there in stunned silence, clutching the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My coworkers' voices faded into the background as my mind replayed every word the lawyer had said. Ethan hadn't just ignored me. He hadn't just walked away. He had gone to a lawyer. He had filed something that included my name. In that moment, I realized that silence wasn't the worst thing he could give me. No, the worst thing was coming, and it was written in documents I hadn't yet seen. I didn't know then, but the call from his lawyer would expose a truth I never saw coming. The lawyer's call played in my head over and over again, like a broken record that refused to stop. It was surreal. I couldn't wrap my mind around what had just happened. But before I even got to that call, before I even stepped foot into his office, the silence between Ethan and me had already been tearing me apart. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the absence of reassurance, of love, of the tiny little affirmations that keep you sane in a relationship. And Ethan's silence, it was suffocating. I'll never forget the first time I truly realized he was ignoring me. It was a Thursday night, late, maybe around 11 p.m. I had been staring at my phone all evening, waiting for him to call, the way he used to without fail. When he didn't, I finally gave in and called him myself. The phone rang and rang 5, 6, 7 times. Then it went to voicemail. I told myself maybe he was busy, maybe he had fallen asleep early. But deep down, a heaviness began to sink into my stomach. I tried again the next night. Same result. Ring after ring, voicemail. I even left a message, my voice trembling slightly as I said, "Hey, Ethan, it's me. Just checking in. Call me when you can." The next morning, I checked my phone obsessively, but there was nothing. No missed call, no message, nothing. Each day after that felt like walking into quicksand. I tried to keep myself busy with work, but every notification sound made me jump. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped, only for disappointment to hit when it was just an email or a group chat notification. I didn't want to admit it, but I was unraveling. My friends noticed it too. Vanessa, the most outspoken of them, didn't hold back one evening when we met for coffee. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Kendra, you've got to stop chasing him. A man who loves you doesn't make you beg for his attention. Silence is an answer, even if it's not the one you want." Her words stung, but I brushed them off. "You don't know Ethan like I do," I insisted. "He's been under a lot of stress at work. He's just going through something." Vanessa shook her head. "Kendra, I've seen this before. Don't let him string you along until there's nothing left of you." But I couldn't let go. I kept making excuses for him, telling myself he would come back around, that this was just a phase. After all, he had loved me once, hadn't he? Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation in my head. It had been so ordinary, nothing that suggested he was pulling away. He had laughed at one of my silly jokes, told me he missed me, promised we'd make plans soon, and then nothing. The abruptness of it all left me spinning. How do you go from, "I miss you," to silence without warning? I started scrolling through his social media late at night, searching for any sign of him. His once frequent posts slowed to a trickle. When he did post, the captions were vague, impersonal, almost as though he was deliberately scrubbing his personality from the internet. There were no photos of us anymore. He hadn't deleted the old ones, but they were buried under months of emptiness. It was like he was fading me out of his life without actually saying it out loud. Every time I saw his name without a message beside it, I felt myself shrink a little more. I began to wonder if I had imagined everything, the love, the connection, the promises. Was I just a placeholder until someone better came along? The thought haunted me. One evening, desperation took over. I dialed his number again, and when it went to voicemail, I poured my heart out in a shaky message. "Ethan, I don't know what's happening, but please talk to me. If you need space, fine. If I did something wrong, tell me. Just don't shut me out like this." I hung up and sat in silence, my chest tight, my breath shallow. The quiet after my own words felt heavier than ever before. I wanted to believe he would hear the desperation in my voice and call me back. But he didn't. Days passed, and the silence remained. By then, I was consumed by questions. Was there someone else? Was he sick? Was he in trouble? The scenarios ran wild in my head, each one more painful than the last. I was desperate for answers, any answers, even if they hurt me. That's why, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number one afternoon, my heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed it, hope flooding me. Maybe Ethan had lost his phone. Maybe this was him calling from a different number. I answered quickly, breathless. "Ethan?" But it wasn't Ethan. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, professional. He introduced himself as an attorney. My mind scrambled to keep up as he explained that he was calling in reference to Ethan and that my name had come up in documents recently filed. For a moment, I couldn't even process what he was saying. "Documents?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Yes," the lawyer said firmly. "But I can't discuss the details over the phone. I need you to come into my office so we can go over everything properly. It's important that we meet as soon as possible." The room around me blurred as I scribbled down the address he gave me. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped the pen. When the call ended, I sat frozen, the silence in my apartment heavier than it had ever been before. This wasn't the kind of silence I had been living with, it was worse. Because this silence wasn't just Ethan ignoring me. It was the silence of secrets, of lies, of something happening behind my back that I couldn't see yet. I thought I had been prepared for anything. I thought the worst thing Ethan could do was refuse to answer my calls, to leave me hanging in limbo. But I was wrong. The silence was just the beginning. What waited for me in that lawyer's office would change everything I thought I knew about Ethan. That number would lead me down a path of betrayal and shocking revelations. When I hung up with the lawyer, I just sat there in a daze, staring at the phone like it might somehow explain itself if I looked at it long enough. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air in the room. All I had wanted, all I had begged for was a call from Ethan. And now, finally, I had gotten one, only it wasn't from him. It was from a lawyer, a complete stranger, speaking in that clipped, professional tone that carried no warmth, no comfort, no recognition of who I was to Ethan. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, word for word. The way he had said Ethan's name, the way he insisted I come to his office, the way he refused to give details over the phone. It was the kind of call that flipped your world upside down in the span of 2 minutes, and I didn't know how to process it. For a few moments, I clung to the desperate hope that maybe this wasn't as bad as it sounded. Maybe Ethan was in some kind of trouble, and the lawyer needed me because I was someone important to him. Maybe this was my chance to finally understand what was going on, to get the answers I had been chasing in silence. But the longer I sat there, the more the panic began to set in. Lawyers didn't call you unless something serious was happening. And if it involved documents with my name on them, that meant Ethan had done something deliberate, something that tied me into whatever mess this was. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind painted worst-case scenarios. Maybe Ethan was in financial trouble, and he had put me down as a co-signer on something without telling me. Maybe he was in debt and creditors were coming after both of us. Or maybe my stomach turned at the thought maybe he had committed a crime, and somehow, I was being dragged into it. By morning, the fear was eating me alive. I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee untouched in front of me, staring at the address the lawyer had given me. Part of me wanted to rip it up and pretend none of this was happening. But another part of me, the part that had been begging for answers, knew I couldn't avoid it. If I didn't go, I would be haunted by the not knowing for the rest of my life. So I pulled myself together as best I could. I put on my most professional outfit, something that made me feel a little less powerless, and drove to the office. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white. The city passed by in a blur, my thoughts looping endlessly. Why a lawyer? Why me? What had Ethan done? When I finally arrived, I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. The building was sleek and modern, with glass windows that reflected the cloudy sky. It looked cold, impersonal, exactly the opposite of the comfort I craved. I forced myself out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me, and walked inside. The receptionist greeted me with a polite but detached smile. "You must be Miss Rivers," she said, checking me in. Her tone was courteous, but it carried none of the warmth people usually give to someone they've been expecting. That made me even more nervous. After a few minutes that felt like hours, I was ushered into a private office. The lawyer was there, the same calm voice I'd heard over the phone, now matched with a sharp suit and an unreadable expression. He gestured for me to sit across from him. "Thank you for coming, Miss Rivers," he began. "I understand this must be confusing for you." Confusing wasn't even the word. It was terrifying. My hands trembled as I clasped them in my lap. What is this about? Why am I here? Where is Ethan? The lawyer's face softened slightly, but his tone remained professional. "Mr. Hayes has filed certain legal documents that involve you directly. I cannot speak to his personal whereabouts, but it is my duty to inform you of the filings." I swallowed hard. "Documents? What kind of documents?" He reached into a folder on his desk and slid a thick envelope across to me. My name was printed clearly on the first page. Seeing it there, in black and white, sent a jolt of panic through me. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, pulling out the papers inside. The words blurred at first as I tried to focus, but then the meaning became clear, line by line, and my stomach dropped. These weren't random legal papers. These were documents about me, about my relationship with Ethan. And the way they were worded, it was like I was some financial leech, some dependent partner draining him of his resources. I blinked, shaking my head, my pulse thundering in my ears. This isn't true. None of this is true. Why would he? My voice trailed off, too broken to finish the sentence. The lawyer cleared his throat gently. "I can't speak to his motives, Miss Rivers. But you have been named in these filings, and it's important you understand the implications. I would strongly recommend you seek your own legal counsel to contest these claims if you disagree with them." Disagree with them? I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was more like a choked sob. Of course I disagreed. Every word in those papers was a lie. A twisted version of my life that painted me as some desperate, dependent woman clinging to Ethan for survival. That wasn't me. That had never been me. But then, my eyes caught something that made the room tilt. At the bottom of the page, alongside Ethan's signature, was another name. I froze. My blood ran cold as I read it again, to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But it was there, clear as day. It wasn't just Ethan who had signed those documents. It was someone else I knew. Someone I trusted. Someone who was supposed to be on my side. I looked up at the lawyer, my voice barely a whisper. Why is she on here?" He gave me a sympathetic look but didn't answer directly. "You'll need to consult your own attorney, Miss Rivers. There's a lot here to untangle." My hands went cold, the papers slipping slightly as I tried to steady them. The betrayal hit me harder than the silence ever had. Ethan had ignored me. Yes. Ethan had broken my heart with his indifference. But this was something else entirely. This was planned. This was deliberate. And the person I thought I could lean on had been part of it all along. I had no idea that the documents I was about to see would break me in half. When I left the lawyer's office that day, my head was spinning. I clutched the envelope of documents against my chest like it was something radioactive, dangerous, toxic, and yet impossible to let go of. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break through my ribcage. I kept hearing my own voice whispering inside my head. Her name was on it. Her name was right there next to his. I barely remember the drive home. The streets blurred, the traffic lights turned from red to green without registering. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and I must have pulled into my apartment's parking lot on autopilot, because I couldn't recall making a single turn. All I knew was that once I was inside, once the door was locked behind me, I would finally tear into those papers and read every last word. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had once sipped wine while telling Lena about Ethan. About how much I loved him. Lena, my closest friend. The woman I trusted with my secrets. The one who always said, "Don't worry, Kendra, he loves you. Give him time." And now, her name was on those documents. I pulled the papers out of the envelope and spread them across the table. My eyes scanned line after line, each word stabbing me deeper. The first page declared Ethan and I were in a domestic partnership, something I had never legally agreed to, never even signed. He had filed it without me, claiming we had lived as financial partners for years. Then came the accusations. Ethan had claimed I was financially dependent on him, that he had supported me through countless expenses, that I had exploited his generosity. He listed fabricated examples, rent payments, credit card bills, even supposed loans I had begged him for. My jaw dropped as I read lies that had never happened. My voice shook as I whispered to the empty room. This isn't true. None of this is true. And then I saw Lena's signature. It was at the bottom of the affidavit, right next to Ethan's. She had attested that his claims were valid, that she had personally witnessed him paying for my life, covering my needs, supporting me financially while I supposedly did nothing in return. I pressed my hand over my mouth, bile rising in my throat. Lena, my friend, had sworn under oath that I was a parasite, a fraud, a woman who lived off a man like a leech. I slammed the papers down, my vision swimming with tears. How could they do this to me? How could Ethan, the man I once thought would be my future, and Lena, the woman who once promised to always have my back, conspire together to erase me like this? Flashbacks came rushing in, conversations that suddenly made horrible sense. Lena telling me not to push Ethan when he pulled away. Lena brushing off my tears with, "He's just stressed, Kendra. Don't take it personally." Lena, who I now realized, had been helping him build this story against me all along. I dropped my head into my hands and sobbed. For a long time, I let myself crumble right there at the table, the documents spread out before me like evidence at a crime scene. And in a way, it was a crime scene, just not one with blood or weapons. This was emotional homicide. They had taken my trust, my love, my loyalty, and murdered them without hesitation. After the tears came the rage. I pushed my chair back and stood abruptly, pacing my small kitchen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers into the fire. I wanted to drive to Lena's apartment and demand she tell me why. But I couldn't do any of those things, not yet. Because beneath the anger was a cold, creeping fear. If these documents went unchallenged, Ethan's lies could ruin me. Legally, financially, professionally, everything I had worked for could be tainted by his false claims. He wasn't just ignoring me anymore. He was trying to erase me, to cut me out of his life in the most brutal, public way possible. I sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought back to the lawyer's words. "You'll need your own counsel. There's a lot here to untangle." He was right. I couldn't fight this on my own. Ethan and Lena had already proven they were willing to lie, to twist reality, to team up against me. If I didn't fight back smartly, I could lose everything. For the first time in weeks, the silence between Ethan and me made sense. He hadn't been too busy to answer my calls. He hadn't been stressed at work. He had been orchestrating this, preparing to blindside me. And Lena had been right there helping him, smiling to my face while stabbing me in the back. The realization burned through me like fire. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the couch, because I woke up hours later to the faint glow of streetlights through the blinds. The documents were still scattered on the table. My head ached, my body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. The tears were gone now. In their place was a kind of icy determination I hadn't felt before. I walked back to the table and gathered the papers carefully, placing them back into the envelope. As much as I wanted to rip them to shreds, I knew I needed them. They weren't just lies, they were evidence. Evidence I could use against Ethan and Lena. Evidence that could expose them for what they really were. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to be the victim they wanted me to be. If Ethan thought he could silence me with paperwork, and if Lena thought she could betray me without consequences, they were both about to learn just how wrong they were. My hands still trembled as I locked the envelope in my desk drawer, but there was a new fire in my chest. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I wasn't just confused or devastated. I was angry, and that anger gave me strength. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady now. You think you can erase me? No, I'm going to fight you. Both of you. The silence that followed wasn't painful anymore. It wasn't the silence of waiting for Ethan to call. It was the silence of resolve, the kind that comes before a storm. But the most shocking part wasn't the documents, it was who signed them alongside Ethan. I sat there, staring at the envelope, Lena's signature burned into my mind like a scar. Out of everything I'd read, that was the part I couldn't shake. Ethan's lies, while devastating, almost made sense. He wanted me gone. He wanted control. He wanted whatever advantage he thought he could get by painting me as a fraud. But Lena? Lena was supposed to be my person. My closest friend. My sounding board when I doubted myself. The one I texted after every date with Ethan, gushing over how perfect he was. The one who told me to be patient when he started pulling away. The one who poured wine into my glass and patted my hand, saying, "Men get scared when things get serious. Don't push too hard." And now she was standing beside him legally, officially, in black ink helping him destroy me. The betrayal sliced through me deeper than Ethan's silence ever had. Silence you could excuse, rationalize, or even forgive. But betrayal? That was active. That was deliberate. She had made a choice, and that choice was not me. The memories started to replay, each one with a new sinister tint. The time Lena canceled dinner plans because she said she had work to catch up on, but now I wondered if she had been with Ethan instead. The nights she would glance at her phone and quickly flip it over, brushing off my questions with a vague smile. The way she always seemed to defend him when I was hurt by his coldness. I thought she had been trying to keep me hopeful. Now I realized she had been softening the ground, preparing me to accept the distance so Ethan could move forward with his plan. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands, my knees, even my voice when I whispered, "Why, Lena? Why would you do this to me?" I wanted to call her right then, to scream into the phone, to demand an explanation. But I knew if I did, she would twist it. She would use that calm, rational voice she always used when I was emotional, and she would gaslight me into believing I was overreacting. I couldn't give her that chance. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed someone else, the lawyer's receptionist. I asked for clarification, for reassurance that what I had seen was real. And she confirmed it. Lena's name, her signature, her sworn statement, all legally filed alongside Ethan's. There was no mistake. No forgery. Lena had chosen this. I hung up the phone and felt like I was floating outside my own body. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too suffocating, filled with memories of conversations I couldn't unhear. Lena, sitting on my couch, sipping wine, telling me to trust Ethan. Lena laughing at my jokes about his quirks. Lena holding me when I cried after another night of silence from him. She had been there for all of it, and she had been lying to me the entire time. The next day, I couldn't focus on work. My boss asked me twice if I was okay, and I just forced a smile, muttering something about not sleeping well. But inside, I was unraveling. I kept opening my email, staring at Lena's contact picture, her smiling face, and feeling my stomach twist. I wanted to delete her from my life completely, but I needed her number, her email, her presence intact. Because if this ever went to court, I wanted proof of our friendship, our conversations, our closeness. She thought she was safe behind Ethan's lies, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That evening, I finally broke down and told Vanessa everything. I showed her the documents, pointed to Lena's signature, watched her face twist in anger and disbelief. "Oh my God," Vanessa whispered. "That snake. That absolute snake. Kendra, I never liked how close she was to him, but I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Now it all makes sense." I dropped my head into my hands. Why would she do this, Vanessa? Why would my best friend help him destroy me? Vanessa put her arm around me, her voice low and steady. "Because she's not your best friend, Kendra. She never was. People like that, people who betray you this way, they don't wake up one morning and suddenly decide to switch sides. She's probably been with him all along. Maybe not in the beginning, but at some point? She made a choice, and it wasn't you." Her words hurt, but they rang true. Deep down, I had suspected it. The way Lena always excused Ethan, the way she seemed so invested in keeping me tethered to him, even when he was hurting me. I clenched my fists, fury bubbling up inside me. They thought they could corner me. They thought I would crumble under the weight of betrayal. But they didn't know me, not really. I might cry, I might break down. But I always get back up. That night, I sat at my desk with a notebook and began writing everything I remembered, every odd comment Lena had made, every inconsistency. Every time Ethan's silence seemed orchestrated rather than accidental. I gathered bank statements, rent receipts, pay stubs, anything that proved I was financially independent. If Ethan wanted to paint me as dependent, I would show the truth. But it wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about exposing them, both of them. For the first time since Ethan stopped answering my calls, I felt a surge of control. Betrayal might have gutted me, but it had also lit a fire I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let them get away with rewriting my life, twisting me into a character I didn't recognize. I wiped my tears and whispered into the quiet room. "You want a fight? You've got one." The silence didn't hurt anymore. It was no longer the silence of unanswered calls, of waiting for someone who would never come. This silence was mine. It was the silence of planning, of gathering strength, of preparing for war. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. But instead of drowning in despair, I made a vow I would fight back. The night I discovered Lena's betrayal was the night something inside me shifted. Up until then, I had been spiraling, lost in confusion, heartbreak, and self-doubt. Ethan's silence had gutted me, and Lena's signature on those documents had shattered me. But as I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of my trust, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg Ethan for answers he clearly never intended to give. And I certainly wasn't going to let Lena's lies define me. No, if they wanted to drag me into a war, then I would walk into battle with my head held high. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for attorneys. My hands still trembled, but this time it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. I combed through reviews, scrolling past the generic ones until I found a local firm that specialized in family and partnership disputes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what I needed. I sent an email detailing the situation as best I could and asked for a consultation. By morning, they had replied. I had an appointment that afternoon. I can't describe the relief I felt when I walked into that attorney's office and sat across from a man named Paul. He was calm, sharp-eyed, with a presence that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely powerless after all. "Let's start from the beginning," he said gently, sliding a notepad in front of him. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about Ethan's silence, the unanswered calls, the sudden disappearance. I explained the lawyer's phone call, the documents, the lies. And when I got to Lena's signature, my voice cracked. Paul listened carefully, jotting down notes. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Kendra, I'll be honest with you. What Ethan filed is weak, very weak. He's trying to establish a narrative that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. And Lena's affidavit? It may hurt emotionally, but in court, without tangible evidence, It's flimsy at best. I blinked at him. So, I can fight this? He nodded firmly. Absolutely, but you'll need proof. The stronger your documentation, the easier it will be to dismantle his claims. Do you have financial records? Bank statements? Anything that shows you were supporting yourself? I almost laughed, though it came out more like a broken chuckle. Yes, I've been paying my own rent, my own bills, my own everything. I have the receipts. Good, Paul said with a small smile. Gather everything. Pay stubs, tax returns, credit card statements, anything that shows you are financially independent. We'll build a timeline that proves his claims are lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't defenseless. There was a way out of this nightmare. That night, I went home and started digging through drawers, files, and folders. I pulled out my bank statements, lined up my rent receipts, stacked my pay stubs in chronological order. Every piece of paper I collected felt like ammunition. Ethan wanted to paint me as a dependent, but the truth was in black and white. I didn't stop there. I opened my phone and began scrolling through old texts and voicemails from Ethan. There were dozens, hundreds, even of messages where he called me his equal, where he praised me for my career, where he admitted he admired my independence. There were voicemails from when he was still in love, telling me how proud he was of me, how he wanted to build a life together. I saved everything, forwarding the files to a secure folder Paul had set up for me. Each time I pressed upload, it was like reclaiming a piece of myself. Ethan had tried to erase. The more I worked, the less I cried. My tears had dried up, replaced by a determination that kept me awake until dawn. Anger had become my fuel, sharper and stronger than heartbreak ever was. But even as I gathered evidence, questions gnawed at me. Why had Ethan done this? Why had Lena betrayed me? What did they gain from it? The answer came a few days later during another meeting with Paul. He leaned forward, pointing to a clause buried deep in Ethan's filings. This isn't just about financial independence, Kendra. Look here, property interests. Ethan listed a property under dispute, one that he tied your name to. My brows furrowed. Property? What property? Paul tapped the papers. It seems Ethan used your name in connection with some real estate dealings. If he succeeds in proving you were financially dependent, he can wipe your name from those dealings entirely, claiming you never had any stake. I stared at him, my stomach dropping. So he's not just trying to ruin me. He's trying to cut me out of something valuable. Paul nodded grimly. Exactly. This isn't about love, or heartbreak, or pride. This is about money, assets. And Lena's affidavit? She's his witness. If she convinces the court that his version of events is true, it strengthens his case. My blood boiled. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Ethan's silence, his distance, Lena's constant excuses. It hadn't been random. It had been a plan. A carefully constructed scheme to use me and then erase me when I wasn't useful anymore. I gripped the edge of Paul's desk, fury coursing through me. So he strung me along, lied to me, ignored me, and now he's trying to erase me from his life completely, all for property? For money? Paul's expression was steady, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. I've seen it before. People do terrible things when greed is involved. But remember, he doesn't win unless you let him. You have truth on your side, Kendra. We just need to present it clearly. I left his office that day with fire in my veins. Ethan and Lena thought they could silence me with lies, but they had underestimated me. They had mistaken my heartbreak for weakness. I spent the next week building my case with a focus I didn't know I was capable of. My apartment turned into a war room, papers stacked neatly by date, digital files categorized into folders, notes scrawled in my handwriting across sticky notes on the walls. Every receipt was a rebuttal. Every text message was a counterattack. Every voicemail was proof of Ethan's duplicity. And as I pieced it all together, my heartbreak transformed fully into fury. I didn't want Ethan back. I didn't want Lena's friendship. I wanted justice. One night, staring at the mountain of evidence I had gathered, I whispered to myself, "You thought I would just disappear. But I'm not going anywhere." I wasn't the same woman who once sat by the phone, waiting for Ethan's call. that Kendra was gone. This Kendra was sharper, stronger, angrier, and she was ready for war. But when I uncovered their real motive, my anger turned into pure shock. By the time I had finished turning my apartment into a paper fortress, I thought I had seen the worst of Ethan's betrayal. Lies. Silence. Lena's signature, those were wounds deep enough to scar me forever. But what Paul uncovered next would prove that Ethan and Lena's plot wasn't just cruel. It was calculated down to the last detail. The morning I learned the truth started like any other. I sat in Paul's office, a folder of my meticulously collected evidence spread across the table between us. He flipped through my pay stubs, rent receipts, and text messages with a look of satisfaction. "This is good," he said, tapping one of my bank statements. "Really good. It paints a picture of independence, consistency, and credibility. Ethan's claims don't stand a chance if this is presented properly." Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Because then Paul pulled out another document, one that made my blood run cold. "I've been digging into Ethan's filings," he explained, sliding the paper toward me. "There's something you need to see. This isn't just about cutting you off. It's about ownership." "Ownership?" My eyes scanned the page, confusion giving way to horror. There, buried in legal jargon, was a clause tying me to a piece of property I didn't even know existed. My name was listed alongside Ethan's in connection with a house, an expensive one, judging by the appraisal figures. I blinked hard, shaking my head. I don't understand. I never signed anything about this. I didn't even know he bought property." Paul nodded grimly. "And that's the point. Ethan attached your name to these documents without your consent. It makes it look like you had a claim to ownership. But by declaring you financially dependent, he can strip that claim away, making it appear as though you never truly had a stake. Once that's done, the property is his and his alone." I felt the air leave my lungs. So all this, the lies, the affidavits, Lena's betrayal, it's about this property? "Yes," Paul said. "It's about money, assets, real estate. He's not just trying to erase you emotionally, Kendra. He's trying to erase you financially. To make sure when he moves forward, you're left with nothing." I sat back in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Anger surged, but beneath it was a deep, bone-crushing sadness. Ethan hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He hadn't just drifted away or gotten scared of commitment. He had used me. From the very beginning, he had been laying groundwork for this moment. And Lena? She wasn't just a friend who had turned her back on me. She was his accomplice. My mind spun back through the timeline of our relationship, the sudden silences, the nights Lena insisted I give him space, the way she always downplayed my concerns. It all made sense now. They weren't random behaviors, they were part of a strategy. They needed me quiet. They needed me passive. They needed me not to suspect anything while they built their case. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. So what? He planned all of this? From the start? Paul's eyes softened. I don't know when it started, but yes. At some point, Ethan decided this was the path he wanted to take. And Lena chose to stand with him. Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every sound in the silence felt louder than it should have. My phone buzzed with a notification, and for the briefest second, I thought it might be Ethan, finally reaching out to explain himself. But it wasn't. It was Lena. Her message was short. "Hey, haven't heard from you. You okay?" I nearly threw my phone across the room. The audacity of it. The gall she had to text me like she was still my friend made me sick. My fingers itched to type back the truth. I wanted to scream. "I know what you did. I know you lied. I know you stood beside him while he destroyed me." But I didn't reply. Not yet. Because as much as I wanted to confront her, I knew that silence was now my weapon. Let her wonder what I knew. Let her stew in her own deceit. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table, staring at the mountain of evidence I had collected. If this was the game Ethan and Lena wanted to play, then fine, I'd play. But I wouldn't play their way. I would fight smarter. Harder. The next week, Paul and I worked tirelessly on my case. He taught me how to frame the narrative, how to use Ethan's own words against him. Together, we pieced together a timeline that not only disproved his claims but also revealed the motive behind them, the property. And the more I worked, the more I realized something important. Ethan hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. He had tried, yes. He had blindsided me, betrayed me. But I was still standing. I was still fighting. One evening, as I sat surrounded by piles of documents, I caught my reflection in the dark window. My hair was messy, my eyes tired. But I looked stronger than I had in weeks. There was fire in my gaze, a resilience I hadn't seen before. This is who I am now, I whispered to myself. Not his victim, not her friend. Just me. And I'm enough. I knew the battle ahead would be brutal. I knew Ethan and Lena would throw every lie they had at me. But I also knew something they didn't seem to realize: when you push someone to the edge, when you betray them so completely, sometimes you don't break them. Sometimes you create someone who will never stop fighting. And that's who I had become. The game had changed. I wasn't just the victim anymore. But I had no idea the courtroom would reveal an even bigger twist. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. One moment, I was drowning in paperwork, sleepless nights, and strategy sessions with Paul. The next, I was standing in front of the courthouse, my stomach in knots, staring up at the stone facade that suddenly felt more intimidating than any building I had ever walked into. I'd imagined this moment 100 different ways. Sometimes I pictured myself storming into the courtroom, demanding Ethan look me in the eye, forcing him to face the wreckage he had left behind. Other times I imagined crumbling the second I saw him, tears blurring my vision, my voice breaking as I begged for answers I knew he'd never give. But when the day finally came, all I felt was cold determination. Paul met me at the entrance, his calm presence steadying me. "Remember," he said quietly as we walked through the metal detectors, "this isn't about emotion. It's about truth. We have the facts, and the facts are on your side." I nodded, but my hands were slick with sweat. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but somehow it felt enormous. Every sound echoed: the shuffle of papers, the creak of benches, the cough of a spectator. My heart pounded in my chest as Paul and I walked to our table. And then I saw them. Ethan sat across the aisle, his posture relaxed, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He was dressed sharply, his suit perfectly tailored, like he had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Beside him sat Lena. Seeing her there on his side, literally and figuratively, was like a knife to the gut. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her blouse crisp, her expression cold. This wasn't the Lena who had once lounged on my couch in sweatpants, laughing over wine. This was someone else entirely. Paul leaned toward me, whispering, "Don't look at them. Focus on me. Focus on the judge. This isn't about them anymore." I forced myself to breathe. The bailiff called for order, and the judge entered, taking her seat at the bench. The air grew heavier instantly, as though the gravity of the situation had finally settled over the room. Ethan's lawyer went first. He stood tall, polished, his words smooth as he painted me as a manipulative, dependent partner who had latched onto Ethan for financial survival. He spoke of loans, of support, of Ethan's generosity, framing me as someone who had taken advantage of a kind-hearted man. Each sentence felt like a dagger. I wanted to leap out of my seat and scream that it wasn't true, that I had never taken a dime from Ethan, that I had worked for everything I had. But Paul's hand on my arm reminded me to stay calm. This was strategy. Let them talk. Let them weave their lies. Because soon, we would unravel them. When it was Paul's turn, he stood with quiet confidence. His voice was steady as he laid out my evidence, piece by piece: bank statements, rent receipts, pay stubs, tax returns. He showed the judge the trail of financial independence I had meticulously maintained, a trail that directly contradicted Ethan's narrative. And then, the text messages. Paul displayed them on the screen. Ethan's words glowing in bold letters. I'm so proud of how hard you work. I admire your independence. I love that you don't need me but choose me anyway. I glanced at Ethan. And for the first time, his confident smirk faltered. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched slightly on the table. Paul pressed on, his voice cutting through the silence. This is not a case of dependency. This is a case of attempted erasure. My client, Miss Rivers, has been nothing but financially independent throughout this relationship. Mr. Hayes' claims are not only baseless, they are malicious in intent. The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable but sharp. I could feel the momentum shifting, the weight of truth pressing against Ethan's carefully constructed lies. But then, just as I let myself breathe, the bailiff called Lena to the stand. I froze. My stomach turned to stone as she walked confidently to the witness chair, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She swore her oath with a steady voice, then sat down, her gaze finally flickering toward me for a brief second. There was no warmth there, no hesitation, just cold resolve. Ethan's lawyer wasted no time. Miss Turner, he began. Can you tell the court what you personally witnessed regarding Mr. Hayes and Miss Rivers' financial arrangement? Lena folded her hands neatly in her lap. Yes, she said smoothly. I was close with both of them. I witnessed Ethan covering Kendra's rent on multiple occasions. I saw him paying for groceries, utilities, even credit card bills. She often told me she couldn't have managed without his support. Her voice didn't waver once. She lied with the ease of someone reciting the weather report. My throat closed. I wanted to scream that she was making it up, that none of it was true. But Paul shook his head slightly, reminding me to hold my ground. Ethan's lawyer smiled. So, in your opinion, Miss Rivers was financially dependent on Mr. Hayes? Yes, Lena said firmly. Absolutely. The words echoed through the courtroom, slamming into me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, my chest tight. I had known she would lie. I had prepared myself for it. But hearing her say it out loud, under oath, with such confidence it was almost unbearable. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning as if Lena's lies had sealed my fate. My vision blurred with hot tears I refused to let fall. Paul rose for cross-examination, but I barely heard his first questions. All I could hear was Lena's voice in my head, repeating that damning word, dependent. For the first time since this nightmare began, doubt clawed at me. What if the judge believed her? What if all my evidence wasn't enough to outweigh Lena's testimony? What if I lost? Everything, not just Ethan, not just Lena, but my dignity, my stability, my future? The courtroom felt like it was closing in around me. The walls seemed to lean closer, the judge's gavel loomed larger, Ethan's smirk stretched wider. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to stay present. This wasn't over. Paul had a strategy, I had truth. And somewhere, deep down, I had to believe that truth would be enough. But at that moment, as Lena's lies filled the courtroom, I wasn't sure if truth could save me. Her testimony wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated attempt to bury me. When Lena's testimony ended, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. She sat there with her back straight, her voice unwavering, as if she hadn't just stabbed me in the chest with every word. She swore up and down that Ethan had been my provider, that I leaned on him financially, that without him I would have collapsed. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the ease with which she lied, not just little fabrications, but bold, sweeping statements that painted me as a parasite. She told the court she had been present when Ethan bailed me out of overdue bills. She claimed I once cried to her about being unable to cover my rent. She even described nights where Ethan supposedly handed me cash to get by. Every lie was like acid poured over my skin. None of it was true, not a single word. But sitting there in that courtroom, listening to her, I realized how convincing it all sounded to someone who didn't know me. Lena had been my closest friend for years. Of course, her word carried weight, and in the cold, echoing room of the courthouse, truth felt smaller than lies. Ethan sat back in his chair, smug and comfortable, as though Lena's performance had sealed my fate. His lawyer smirked too, clearly pleased with the damage she had inflicted. I wanted to scream, to leap out of my seat and demand she stop twisting my life into some sordid story. But Paul's steady hand on my arm reminded me that losing control was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me emotional, they wanted me desperate. They wanted me to look like the unstable, dependent woman they had described. So I bit down hard on my tongue, swallowing the rage that threatened to explode. When Paul rose for cross-examination, I held my breath. He started calmly, asking Lena simple questions about dates and details. At first, she handled it smoothly. But then he began to poke holes. "Miss Turner," he said, "you claim you witnessed Ethan paying for Miss Rivers' rent. On which dates specifically?" Lena shifted slightly in her seat. "I don't remember exact dates." Paul nodded. "Understandable. But surely you could recall the month?" She hesitated. "I believe it was last spring." Paul raised an eyebrow. "Last spring?" "Because the rental ledger shows Miss Rivers paid her landlord directly every month." "Can you explain that discrepancy?" Lena blinked, caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "Perhaps it was for a utility bill then. I just remember Ethan helping her." Paul's voice was calm, but sharp as a blade. "So your memory has shifted from rent to utilities in the span of 30 seconds? Lena's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. I wanted to cheer. For the first time I saw her veneer crack, just a little. But the damage had already been done. Her lies still lingered in the air, poisonous and heavy. The judge leaned back in her chair, thoughtful, her face unreadable. By the time Lena stepped down from the witness stand, I felt sick. My evidence was strong, yes, but her testimony had shaken me. What if the judge believed her over me? What if Ethan's lies, backed by Lena's betrayal, outweighed my truth? That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, replaying her words in my head. Dependent. Helpless. Supported by Ethan. None of it was real. But the fear of it becoming the narrative of my life consumed me. The next day in court, Ethan's lawyer looked more confident than ever. He presented Ethan's narrative as though Lena had cemented it in stone. "Even her closest friend confirms she was dependent on Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice echoing. "There is no greater credibility than that." My chest tightened. For a fleeting moment, I thought it was over. I thought I had lost. But then, like a scene ripped out of a movie, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, sharp-featured, with a purposeful stride. She carried a folder under her arm, her expression resolute. She made her way straight to Paul, whispered something in his ear, and handed him the folder. I blinked, confused. Who was she? Paul's eyes lit up as he glanced through the documents. Then he stood abruptly, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, we request permission to introduce new evidence from a witness who has just come forward." The judge frowned slightly but nodded. "Proceed." The woman stepped to the stand, swore her oath, and introduced herself as Mia. My heart jumped when she explained her connection. She had worked with Ethan for years at his old firm. "I came here today," Mia said firmly, "because I couldn't stay silent knowing what Ethan is doing." The courtroom shifted instantly. Ethan sat up straighter, his smirk gone. Lena's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. Mia opened her folder and revealed a series of printed emails. "In these emails," she explained, "Ethan bragged about manipulating Kendra. He admitted she was independent, that she had her own career, her own money, her own stability. He told colleagues that he was going to set her up to look dependent so he could cut her out of property deals." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My jaw dropped. Paul handed the judge copies of the emails, reading aloud excerpts that directly contradicted Ethan and Lena's entire narrative. "She thinks she's smart, but once Lena signs off, she'll look like she was always living off me. Kendra works harder than me, but no one has to know that." I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded as each word pierced the lies that had been suffocating me. The judge's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing at Ethan. His face had drained of color, his confident mask shattered. Lena shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap. For the first time since this nightmare began, the power in the room shifted. Truth wasn't small anymore, it was massive, undeniable, crashing down like a tidal wave that swept their lies away. I sat taller, my shoulders back, my breath steady. For weeks, I had been suffocated by their betrayal, crushed under their deception. But now I had proof. Now, they were the ones cornered. And I realized something profound in that moment. Lies may sound convincing, but the truth has a weight that cannot be denied. Ethan avoided my gaze. Lena stared at the table, her composure gone. And I? For the first time, I allowed myself the smallest smile. That witness carried proof that shattered their entire case. When Mia finished her testimony, the air in the courtroom felt different. The tension that had weighed me down like chains was suddenly lighter, replaced by a quiet hum of possibility. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope flicker in my chest, not timid, not fragile, but strong and steady. Ethan's face was a sight I'll never forget. The smug grin he had worn like armor was gone. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting between Mia and the judge like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. Lena, on the other hand, looked pale, her hands twisting together in her lap, as if she could wring the lies from her fingers. Paul stood confidently, holding up the stack of printed emails Mia had provided. "Your Honor, these are direct admissions from Mr. Hayes himself. They show, in his own words, that Miss Rivers was financially independent and that his claims were fabricated as part of a calculated plan. Furthermore, they implicate Miss Turner as complicit in this scheme." The judge leaned forward, her gaze sharp as she skimmed the documents. The silence stretched long enough for my heartbeat to sound like a drum in my ears. Then she looked up, her voice cool and deliberate. "Mr. Hayes, do you have an explanation for these emails?" Ethan's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, we object to this evidence being admitted at this stage." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "The objection is noted and overruled. The evidence stands." "Mr. Hayes?" All eyes turned to Ethan. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Ethan just sat there, his face stiff, his hands clenching the table as if he could hold onto the lies that were slipping through his fingers. He stammered finally. But the words collapsed into silence. The judge's expression hardened. "Very well." Paul didn't waste a second. He began presenting the emails one by one, weaving them into the timeline of events we had built. There was Ethan, bragging to colleagues about how independent I was. There was Ethan, mocking me for being too trusting. There was Ethan, detailing how Lena would provide the affidavit to seal the deal. Each email was a nail in the coffin of his case. Each word was a dagger slicing through the fabric of his deception. I sat there in awe, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and righteous fury. For weeks, I had been the one on trial, my life, my character, my dignity. But now, the spotlight was on Ethan. And for the first time, he couldn't spin, couldn't smirk, couldn't hide. Lena, too, was unraveling. Paul confronted her directly during cross-examination. "Miss Turner, you testified under oath that Ethan supported Miss Rivers financially. Yet here, in these emails, Ethan clearly states she was independent and that you would back his claims regardless of the truth. How do you reconcile that contradiction?" Her face flushed red. She stumbled over her words, insisting she must have misremembered or misunderstood. But the damage was done. The judge's eyes narrowed as Lena's credibility crumbled. I almost pitied her in that moment, almost. But then I remembered every time she told me to be patient, every time she defended Ethan, every time she smiled at me while secretly plotting my downfall. No, I didn't pity her. Not one bit. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Paul laid out the final pieces of our case. He stacked the evidence, my bank statements, my pay stubs, Ethan's incriminating emails, Lena's contradictions until the picture was undeniable. "This isn't a case of dependency," Paul said firmly, his voice resonating through the room. "This is a case of betrayal. Mr. Hayes attempted to use the legal system as a weapon to erase Miss River's independence and steal what rightfully belonged to her. And Miss Turner willingly assisted him in that scheme. The judge nodded slowly, her face stern. The evidence is compelling. Very compelling. I exhaled shakily, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table. This was it. This was the moment I had been fighting for. The tide had turned. And the truth was finally louder than their lies. Ethan's lawyer tried to recover, fumbling through objections and half-hearted explanations. But it was pointless. Every attempt fell flat against the weight of the evidence. The judge's expression made it clear. She wasn't buying it. I glanced at Ethan one last time, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked small. He looked powerless. And I realized something profound. Silence had been his weapon, but now, silence was his punishment. Because no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't talk his way out of the truth. The hearing wrapped up, and the judge announced that her ruling would come soon. Court was adjourned for the day. I gathered my papers, my heart pounding with both relief and exhaustion. As we stood to leave, Lena tried to avoid my gaze, but I didn't let her. I stared at her until she finally glanced up, and when our eyes met, I saw it, the guilt, the shame, the cracks in her armor. She looked away first. Outside the courthouse, the air felt fresher, cleaner, as if the truth itself had swept through and cleared the poison Ethan and Lena had spread. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm my face, savoring the first true breath of relief I'd had in weeks. Paul placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did great today." The truth spoke for itself. I nodded, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you. For believing me. For fighting with me." He smiled gently. "You fought for yourself, Kendra. I just gave you the tools." As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened, the unanswered calls, the betrayal, the lies. I had been broken down to nothing. Forced to question my worth, my sanity, my strength. But here I was, standing taller than ever. And I knew one thing for certain. Ethan and Lena would never win. At that moment, I realized justice was finally within reach. But the verdict would decide more than just freedom, it would decide my future. The day of the verdict felt heavier than the day of the hearing. I woke up before sunrise, my body buzzing with nerves, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor for what felt like hours. No amount of preparation, no mountain of evidence, no pep talks from Paul could erase the gnawing fear inside me. This was it. Months of heartbreak, sleepless nights, betrayal, and endless strategizing had all led to this one moment. The judge would decide not only whether Ethan's lies would stick, but whether I could walk away from this nightmare with my dignity intact. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired but fierce, my jaw set with determination. I wasn't the same woman who once sat by the phone, begging for Ethan's call. That woman had been shattered, but out of her pieces, someone stronger had emerged. Still, I whispered to my reflection, "Please, let the truth win today." The courthouse was buzzing when I arrived. I spotted Ethan immediately. He stood near the doors with his lawyer, trying to look composed, but the tightness in his posture gave him away. Lena was there too, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room. For the first time, she didn't look untouchable. She looked fragile. Paul walked beside me, his calm confidence a steady anchor. "No matter what happens today, remember you told your story. You fought back. That matters." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Every seat was filled, and the low murmur of voices fell silent as the bailiff called for order. When the judge entered, the room seemed to shrink, every ounce of energy focusing on her. She adjusted her glasses, glanced at her notes, and began. Her voice was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority. After reviewing the filings, the testimony, and the evidence presented by both parties, this court has reached a decision. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The judge continued, her tone steady. Mr. Hayes has alleged that Miss Rivers was financially dependent on him and that her claims to property should be invalidated on that basis. However, the court finds insufficient evidence to support Mr. Hayes' allegations. In fact, the evidence presented overwhelmingly demonstrates that Miss Rivers was financially independent throughout the duration of the relationship. A rush of relief surged through me, so powerful I almost gasped. I gripped the edge of the table, my hands trembling. The judge wasn't finished. She picked up the stack of emails Mia had provided. Furthermore, these communications, written by Mr. Hayes himself, explicitly acknowledge Miss Rivers' independence and reveal an intent to manipulate the truth for personal gain. This evidence severely undermines the credibility of Mr. Hayes' claims. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lawyer whispering furiously beside him. As for Miss Turner, the judge went on, her eyes narrowing slightly. Her testimony has been deemed unreliable due to inconsistencies exposed under cross-examination and the direct contradictions presented by the email evidence. The court does not find her statements credible. Lena's face flushed crimson. She stared at the table, her hands twisting together in her lap. I held my breath as the judge delivered the final blow. Accordingly, the court dismisses all claims against Miss Rivers. Additionally, due to the fraudulent nature of Mr. Hayes' filings, he is hereby ordered to cover Miss Rivers' legal expenses in full. The property documents submitted under false pretenses are nullified and void. The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. It was over. For a long moment, I sat frozen in my chair, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then it hit me. I had won. Not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. Ethan's lies had been crushed under the weight of the truth. Lena's betrayal had been exposed for what it was. Tears blurred my vision. But this time they weren't from heartbreak or despair. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of survival. I turned to Paul, my voice breaking. "We did it." He smiled warmly. "No, Kendra, you did it." Across the aisle, Ethan's mask had finally cracked. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a hard line, his jaw tight with rage. Lena looked even worse, her composure shattered, her body hunched as if she wished she could disappear into the wooden bench beneath her. For the first time, they looked small, powerless, exactly as they had tried to make me feel. As the courtroom emptied, I gathered my things with shaking hands. People brushed past me, murmuring words of congratulations I barely registered. My focus was locked on Ethan and Lena as they slunk out of the room, avoiding my gaze. They couldn't look at me. And that was victory enough. Outside, the sun was blinding, the air crisp and clean. I closed my eyes and tilted my face toward the sky, letting the warmth wash over me. It felt like the first real breath of freedom I'd taken in months. Paul clapped me gently on the shoulder. "It's done. You can start moving forward now." I nodded, my chest swelling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Moving forward, that sounded both terrifying and exhilarating. For so long, my life had revolved around Ethan's silence, Lena's betrayal, the weight of their lies. Now, for the first time, I had the chance to write my own story without them in it. As I drove home, I thought about all the nights I had sat by the phone, begging for Ethan's voice. All the times I had leaned on Lena, believing she was my friend. All the tears I had cried over people who had never truly valued me. And I realized something. This victory wasn't just about proving Ethan wrong. It wasn't even about exposing Lena. It was about reclaiming myself, my strength, my worth. But deep down, I also knew something else. People like Ethan don't just slink away quietly. His pride, his ego, his need for control, they weren't gone. And if I had learned anything from this ordeal, it was that his silence had always been dangerous. I had won the battle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan wasn't finished with me yet. Because outside that courtroom, Ethan wasn't done trying to hurt me. I thought the courtroom was the end. When the gavel came down, I believed that would be the final chapter of Ethan's presence in my life. But I should have known better. Men like Ethan don't lose gracefully. They don't disappear quietly. Defeat makes them desperate, and desperation makes them dangerous. The first message came just 3 days after the verdict. My phone buzzed late at night, and when I saw his name on the screen, my heart lurched painfully. For a second, I considered not opening it, but curiosity habit maybe got the better of me. It was a long text, pages of words spilling across the screen, full of excuses and self-pity. Kendra, please, I made mistakes. I was confused. Lena twisted things. She pushed me into it. I never meant to hurt you like this. You know me, you know I loved you. I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything he had done lying under oath, trying to erase me legally, dragging my name through the mud, this was his strategy? Blame Lena. Paint himself as the victim. Pretend the court hadn't just exposed his entire scheme. I deleted the message without replying. The next day, there was another one. Just give me a chance to explain. We were good together. Don't throw that away. Then another, I need to see you. Please, just one conversation. And another, I miss you. I can't stop thinking about you. Each one made my stomach twist, not with longing but with disgust. Where had all this affection been when I begged him to answer my calls? Where was this desperation when he was building a legal case to erase me? He didn't miss me. He missed control. When my silence stretched longer than he could stand, his tone shifted. The messages grew sharper, angrier. You can't ignore me forever. After everything I did for you, this is how you treat me? Don't think you're safe just because the judge believed you. That last one sent a chill crawling down my spine. I showed Paul the messages, and he immediately told me to document everything. If this escalates, he said firmly, you'll need proof to protect yourself. I blocked Ethan's number. But blocking him didn't block his determination. A week later, he showed up at my workplace. I was in a meeting when my receptionist slipped me a note. There's a man waiting in the lobby asking for you. Says his name is Ethan. My heart stopped. For a moment, the walls of the office seemed to close in on me. My coworkers continued talking, oblivious to the panic rushing through me. I excused myself quickly and stepped into the hallway, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I didn't go downstairs. Instead, I called building security. By the time I reached the lobby, Ethan was already being escorted out. But seeing him there, seeing his face again, was like a punch to the chest. He looked different, thinner, more ragged than the last time I'd seen him. But his eyes still carried that same cold entitlement. Kendra! He shouted, struggling against the guard's grip. We need to talk, just give me 5 minutes. I stood frozen, my arms wrapped around myself, as the guards pushed him toward the door. Don't do this, he yelled. You think you won in there, but you didn't win me. You'll regret this. The doors shut behind him, his voice muffled but still ringing in my ears. My coworkers stared as I walked back inside, my face pale, my body shaking. I forced a smile and muttered something about a personal matter, but inside, I was breaking all over again. The courtroom had given me freedom, but Ethan wasn't letting go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside my window felt like him lurking. Every creak of the apartment made me jump. His words echoed in my head, "You'll regret this." The next morning, I marched into Paul's office and told him everything. He didn't hesitate. It's time for a restraining order, he said firmly. He's escalating. You can't let this continue. Filing the paperwork felt surreal. Just months ago, Ethan had been the man I thought I would marry. Now I was signing forms to legally keep him away from me. My hand trembled as I scrawled my name, but underneath the fear, there was resolve. I wasn't going to let him win, not in court, not in my life, not in my peace. When the judge approved the temporary restraining order, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't foolproof, but it was something. It was a line in the sand. A declaration that I would not be his victim anymore. Ethan tried once more, sending a frantic email from a new address before the order was served. It was long, erratic, swinging from apologies to threats in the same paragraph. "You're ruining my life. You were supposed to be my partner. How can you betray me like this? Don't you remember how good we were together? I'll make you see reason. One way or another." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Paul, who forwarded it to the court. The restraining order was served the next day. And when it was official, when I knew he legally couldn't come near me, I finally let myself exhale. I realized then that Ethan had never been remorseful. He had never been in love, not in the way I had. What he wanted wasn't me, it was control. And when the court stripped that from him, he scrambled desperately to claw it back. But he failed, and for the first time I felt truly free. But I knew freedom required more than legal papers. It required one last act of strength to finally set myself free. When the restraining order was officially granted, I held the stamped papers in my hands like they were a shield. For the first time in months, I felt something close to safety. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it was enough to steady me, enough to remind me that Ethan's grip on my life was gone. But safety alone wasn't freedom. Freedom meant more than keeping Ethan away. It meant rebuilding the parts of me that had been chipped away by his silence, his betrayal, and Lena's lies. And I was determined to reclaim every single piece. The first step was closure, or at least my attempt at it. I couldn't shake the image of Lena's face when the judge called her testimony unreliable. I needed to look her in the eye one last time, not for her explanation but for my own peace. I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight. "Kendra, I didn't waste time. We need to meet. Just once. After that, we're done forever." There was a pause, then a resigned sigh. "Fine, tomorrow, coffee shop on Maple." The next day, I walked into the cafe with my heart pounding but my head clear. Lena was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hair pulled back neatly as if that could restore the image of composure she had lost. When I sat down, she avoided my eyes. "You wanted to talk." "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Why?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she shrugged. "Ethan promised me things, money, a future. He said he loved me. I believed him." I stared at her, the words hitting me like cold water. "So you destroyed me because he dangled promises in front of you?" Her eyes flickered toward me, then away. I didn't think it would go this far. I let out a bitter laugh. "You signed your name on documents to erase me. You stood in a courtroom and lied under oath. Don't tell me you didn't think it would go this far." Silence stretched between us. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw guilt flash in her eyes. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a defensive tilt of her chin. "I made a choice," she said quietly. "And it wasn't you." There it was, the truth, spoken plainly. I nodded slowly. "Then this is my choice. You're out of my life. For good." I stood up, left my half-finished coffee on the table, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Walking away from Lena wasn't just about severing a toxic friendship. It was about reclaiming my ability to choose who belonged in my life. For too long, Ethan and Lena had made choices for me. That ended now. The next step was myself. I threw myself into my career again, not as a distraction but as a declaration. I stayed late at the office because I wanted to, not because I was hiding from pain. I pitched bold ideas in meetings, spoke with confidence, and let myself shine without fear of being told I was too much. And slowly, I started to feel the pieces of me return. I also began therapy. At first, it felt strange, sitting across from a stranger and spilling out months of pain. But my therapist, Dr. Collins, helped me unravel the tangled mess Ethan and Lena had left behind. She reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to their betrayal. That trust broken by others didn't mean I couldn't trust myself again. One session, she asked me, "Kendra, when you think about yourself before Ethan, who were you?" I thought for a long time before answering. I was strong, independent. I believed in love, but I didn't need it to define me. "And who are you now?" she asked. I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. Stronger, wiser. I still believe in love, but this time, it starts with myself. That became my mantra. Love starts with me. I began to savor the little victories. Cooking myself dinner and enjoying it alone without feeling lonely. Meeting friends without constantly checking my phone. Laughing freely, without the heaviness of betrayal shadowing every smile. And with each small victory, I felt more powerful. Ethan had tried to define me as dependent. Lena had tried to define me as disposable. But I was neither. I was independent. I was resilient. I was whole. The final act of reclaiming my power came when I returned to the courthouse, not for Ethan, but for myself. I walked those halls again, not as a woman terrified of losing everything, but as a woman who had fought for her truth and won. I filed the final paperwork for the permanent restraining order, my head high, my steps steady. When I handed the documents to the clerk, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. Not because Ethan was legally barred from my life, but because I had chosen to put that barrier there. It was my choice. My boundary. My protection. That night, I lit a candle in my apartment and sat quietly, reflecting on everything I had been through. I thought about the silence that once tore me apart, the betrayal that once made me doubt myself, the lies that once threatened to erase me. And then I thought about the woman sitting there in that moment, stronger, freer, unbroken. For the first time in months, I whispered to myself, I am enough. And I believed it. And that strength set the stage for the life I would finally build for myself. When I look back now, it feels almost surreal. The silence, the lies, the courtroom, the betrayal. It's like watching an old film reel of someone else's life, flickering and grainy at the edges. But it was mine. I lived it. I survived it. And what's more, I grew from it. For a long time, I carried the weight of Ethan and Lena like shackles. Their betrayal was the filter through which I saw everything, my friendships, my work, even myself. I kept asking, how could they do this to me? What was wrong with me that made me so easy to discard? But the truth is, their actions were never a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of theirs. It took time. But I stopped asking why they betrayed me and started asking a better question. What will I do now that they're gone? The answer came slowly, in small steps. I started with my environment. I moved to a new apartment across town, one that didn't hold memories of unanswered phone calls and nights spent crying into my pillow. I filled it with light colors and soft fabrics, hung plants by the windows, and let sunlight pour in. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a sanctuary. A reminder that I deserved peace. Then I turned to myself. I embraced routines that made me feel whole again. Morning runs, even if my legs protested. Journaling before bed, pouring my thoughts onto paper so they wouldn't weigh on me overnight. Cooking meals that nourished me instead of grabbing fast food while scrolling through Ethan's social media like I used to. Little by little, I stitched myself back together. Therapy helped too. Dr. Collins guided me through the layers of grief, not just for the relationship, but for the friendship I lost in Lena. She helped me understand that closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes closure is a choice you make for yourself. A decision to stop bleeding from wounds they'll never apologize for. One session, Dr. Collins said something that stuck with me. Kendra, healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new with the wisdom you've earned. And that's exactly what I did. Work became a source of pride again. I stopped hiding in the background and started stepping into leadership roles. Speaking with confidence. Letting myself be seen. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding my sense of self. Friendship became sweeter too. Vanessa stood by me through it all, never wavering, never letting me sink too deep into despair. I began surrounding myself with people who lifted me up instead of weighing me down. The laughter I shared with them was genuine, untainted by suspicion or betrayal. And slowly, love didn't feel like a wound anymore. Not romantic love, not yet, but self-love. I found joy in the little things, sipping coffee on my balcony while the city stirred awake, laughing until my sides hurt at girls' nights, breathing deeply during yoga sessions, feeling the air fill my lungs and remind me I was alive. I was free. Ethan and Lena became shadows, distant and irrelevant. I didn't check their social media. I didn't ask about them. I didn't care. They were chapters I had already closed, characters in a story I had outgrown. One evening, months after the final hearing, I lit a candle in my living room and opened my journal. I wrote down everything I had learned. That silence can be more painful than words, but it can also teach you resilience. That betrayal doesn't mean you're weak, it means you trusted, and trust is never a flaw. That love should never require you to shrink, to beg, or to doubt yourself. That walking away can be the most powerful act of self-respect. As I wrote, I realized I wasn't writing just for myself anymore. I was writing for the woman I used to be, the one who sat by the phone waiting for Ethan's call, who cried in Lena's arms not knowing those arms were already betraying her. I was writing for her, to tell her that she made it through, that she was stronger than she knew. And maybe, in some small way, I was writing for anyone else who might feel the same. Because if I could survive the silence and come out stronger, then maybe others could too. Sometimes, I still catch myself thinking about the call that started it all. The one I thought was Ethan, but turned out to be a lawyer. That call shattered me. It ripped my illusions apart and forced me to face truths I wasn't ready to see. But in hindsight, it also saved me. Without that call, I might have stayed stuck in his silence, waiting for answers that would never come. Without that call, I might have clung to a friend who was quietly destroying me. Without that call, I might never have discovered the strength I carry now. It's strange, isn't it? The very thing that broke me was also the thing that set me free. Now, when my phone buzzes, I don't feel that old panic. I don't stare at the screen, desperate for someone else's name to appear. I answer when I want to. I ignore it when I choose to. My phone doesn't control me anymore. Silence doesn't control me anymore. Because I've learned that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes silence is peace. Sometimes silence is healing. Sometimes silence is power. And mine is powerful. When people ask me now about Ethan, I smile faintly and say, he was a lesson. When they ask about Lena, I shrug and say, she showed me who she really was. I don't dwell. I don't ache. I don't burn with anger. I just move forward. Because that's the life I chose after the silence. One of forward motion, one of growth, one of strength. I chose to stop waiting for answers. I chose to stop bleeding for people who never deserved me. I chose myself. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that sometimes the call that breaks you is the same one that saves you. My silence is no longer painful, it is powerful. And this time, it belongs to me.